Okay, so today's lesson we're going to look at quadratic sequences. So to start off with, we're just going to have a little reminder of the sequences that we did before when we looked at linear sequences. So linear sequences are a pattern, and we're trying to find the rule or the nth term of that pattern. So we look for what the difference is between each number. So we've done all of this before, and on this one we're adding 4 each time. So we're adding 4 to each number, and that then gives me 4n. So the rule for my sequence is 4n, but I also need to work out what came before in the sequence. So if I'm adding 4 to go this direction, then I'm subtracting 4 when I go back. So I'm going to take off 4, and that will give me the number that came first, which is 5. So now I know that I've got plus 5. So I take the number from here and add it on at the end, and then the difference between each term is the number of n that I've got. So we've been doing loads of linear sequences, and you've done quite a few of these before. The linear sequence on the right hand side, so 32, 29, 26, 23, 20, it's decreasing, so we're reducing it each time. So we've got minus something as we go to each number. And on this one, you're taking off 3 each time. So my rule is minus 3n. And then I need to go back and look what came first. And the number that came before it, this time I'm going to have to add on 3. And that gives me 35. So I've got minus 3n plus 35. And that's going to be the rule of my sequence. So that's what we've done before with linear sequences. With quadratic, they look a little bit different. So we can start them off the same way because we can't really tell at this point whether they're linear or not. So we might start it in exactly the same way, and we're just going to start by looking at the difference between each number. So the first one is going from 3 to 8, so I'm adding on 5. And then the next one, I'm going from 8 to 15. So in this one, I'm adding on 7. And then the 15 to 24, I'm actually adding on 9. And then 24 to 35, I'm adding on 11. So you can see on this one that I'm actually adding on a different number each time. So each of these differences is different, and that means that it's not a linear sequence. So when that happens, we can't answer it by hand, and instead we're going to be using the GDC. Okay, so as soon as you see any sort of quadratic sequence, we're going to have to use the GDC to help us to answer it instead. So on my GDC, I'm just going to click on this button here, which is the like spreadsheet looking one. It's like a grid, and it opens up a spreadsheet. And the first bit is I'm going to write down the term number. So this is like n, if you like. I can write n or term. I've got the first term, the second term, the third term, the fourth term, and the fifth term. And in this one, I'm going to put the sequence. So I'm going to write S. And the sequence for the first term is 3. The second term was 8. The third term was 15. The fourth term was 24. And the fifth term was 35. So I've just literally taken the sequence that I was given, and I'm just writing it into my GDC. And when I've done that, I'm going to go to Document, Insert, and I'm going to click on Data and Statistics. And that opens up a graph. Okay, so you might remember when we did the linear sequences, we had a look at, for example, 4n plus 2 as my rule, and we said that that's the same sort of thing as an x and y graph. So the first term, if I substitute in 1 into n, then the first term would be 6, so that's 6. And then the second term, so this time I'm substituting in 2, and that gives me 4 times 2 plus 2, which is going to be 10. So my second term is 10. And eventually it forms a straight line graph. So we've had a look at that before. With the quadratic sequences, they're going to form a quadratic graph rather than a linear graph. But it's the same sort of idea. So the reason that we're typing this into the GDC is because the GDC is going to help us to work out what the answer is, whereas we can't do it by hand. So I'm going to have my n, which is like what term it is, so the first term, the second term, the third term, fourth term, and fifth term. And then along the y-axis, I need to select s, so that's the value of the sequence. So for the first term, it was 3, the second term, it was 8, the third term was 15, fourth term, 24, and the fifth term, 35. And then we can get the GDC to work out the line of best fit that goes through those points, and that will be the rule of the equation or of the sequence. So to do that, I'm going to go to Menu, Analyze, and Regression. And I want to show a quadratic regression line because we've realized that it's quadratic. And the reason that we know it's quadratic is that the second line is the same. The second set of differences is always plus 2. So whereas the first one was 5, then 7, then 9, then 11, the second line is always the same. And when the second line is the same, that means that it's quadratic. And that means that we can do this system. And the equation that's come up there is the answer for the sequence rule. So I've got 1 times x squared. That dot floating in the middle, that's just times. So I've got 1x squared plus 2x plus 0. And we would normally write that as just x squared. We know that we don't really need the 1. And 2x, and then we don't need to write the 0, so it's just x squared plus 2x, and that is my answer, or the nth term rule for this sequence. Normally, they will ask you for the nth term rule, so if they do, then we just need to change that into n instead of x, so it would be n squared plus 2n. And that would be your final answer. So all of this is done on the GDC, okay? It's all done through the GDC. So on here, I've just written down for you the different steps. So the first thing that we did was that we input the data into the spreadsheet. Then we did the data insert and data and statistics, and that brought up the graph. And then once we've got the graph, we do need to select, so this brings or shows you the graph. And once you've got that graph, you need to select, let me draw it as a graph for you. So you need to select N and you need to select S on your axis. And then once you've done that, we can do Menu, Analyze, Regression, and Quadratic, and that shows us the final rule. Okay, so that's all the steps for the GDC. So looking at some other questions, we would go, I'm just going to come out of this document. So opening up a new one, I would go to the spreadsheet and I would do N and the first term, second term, third term, fourth term, and fifth term. And then I do S, which is the term of the sequence. So this time I've got 3, 9, 19. So I'm just literally reading them off here. The next one is 33, and then the last one is 51. So I'm then going to do Document, Insert, Data and Statistics. and then I need to select my variable, which is n and s, and again we can see that curved shape of the quadratic, and then we do menu, analyze, regression, and we want to show a quadratic regression, and then that's my final answer. So for the first one here, the rule is going to be 2x squared, which I should write as n squared, plus 0x, which I'm going to write as n, plus 1. And we know that that is the same as writing 2n squared plus 1. Okay, so that's my final answer. And if I wanted to check, then this is the first term, the second term, the third term, the fourth term, and the fifth term. So that means that if I substitute into my n value 1, so if I substitute into here 1, I would get 2 times 1 squared, which is going to be 2 times 1 squared plus 1. So I've got 2 plus 1, which is equal to 3. And that works. That's my first term. So that was what I was given just here for my first term. And then I can test it for the second term. So this time, let's assume that n is 2 for the second term. So I've got 2 times 2 squared plus 1. So that's 2 times 4 plus 1, 8 plus 1, which is equal to 9. And again, I can check, and that's good. That was my second term. And I could keep doing that, and that would test it for all of the different values, and it would work every time. So I know that that rule is right, and I can check it myself. For the second one, I'm just going to go back to the home, and then I'm going to click the spreadsheet again. So again, I've got my n. And you'll notice it brings up all of the same values, which makes it quite hard to do. So you've got 2 options here. The first one is just to keep in the original one and just to change these numbers. So I could just delete all of these, and I could write in the new sequence, which is 4, 15, 32, 55, and 84. And then I can go from there. Or you can do Control, this blue button here, and then the up arrow. And that brings up all of the windows that you've currently got open. And all you need to do is press delete, 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 and it will delete all of the windows that you've got open. Some of you might have an awful lot there if you've never deleted anything. So I would delete everything on there just so that your calculator runs a bit quicker. So once you've done that, you can then go back and type your sequence in again. So the first term, second term, third term, fourth term, and fifth term, and then the value of the sequence, S. So the second sequence here is 4, 5, 15, and 32. So I'm just going to type that in, 4, 15, 32, 55, and 84. And then I can do Document, Insert, Data and Statistics. I select my N, I select my S, and from there I can then do my menu, analyze, regression, and quadratic regression. And I can see that my answer for this one is 3x squared, or n squared as I have to write it, plus 2x, or n, and then I've got plus minus 1. You won't really get deducted any marks in the exam for writing that, but you should really write it as just negative 1. So that gives you 3n squared plus 2n minus 1. And again, we could check it, and we can check that we've got the right answer. So have a go at the third one, pause the video, have a go at the third one, and then we'll go through it together after. Okay, so the last one, the third question on there, we had 4, then we had 9, 18, 31 and 48. And the graph then gives you should have got the equation 2x squared, or n squared as we have to write it, minus 1n, because it's plus minus again, plus 3. So that gives me 2n squared minus n plus 3. And that's my final answer for the last one. So for every single one of these questions, you're using the same kind of instruction and you're doing them all on the GDC. Okay? So you've now got 8 questions to have a go at that you need to work out on the GDC and then find each of the answers. And then we're going to come back together for the last 5 minutes on the lesson. And I'd like you to hold up your answers to the screen. Thank you.